Ooh, the wheels do indeed keep turning on LoveBabz Love Talk. Welcome to the second hour. I'm Babz Rawls-Ivy. I'm delighted because I have people who I really like on the show today. Hey, Mike Morand, who is community engagement at the Beinecke, which is one of my favorite places to go. And
Good morning, Babz. And I'd see your like and raise you and say, I love you.
I love you too, Mike Morand. Thank you for my sweatshirt. I would have put it on this morning. It would have been a great. I should have grabbed it off the door and put it on this morning. And then Charles Warner, or as we like to call him, Chaz Warner. You probably don't like Chaz anymore because you're all grown up. But hey, Chaz Warner. Chaz Warner works for the public school system. He's on the board at Dixwell Community Church and a couple of other places. But they're here today to talk about the Shining Light on Truth, the New Haven, Yale, and Slavery at the New Haven Museum exhibit, which I have not got a chance because they don't open till Wednesday. So I'll be over there sometime tomorrow between the next couple of days to see it. But I've been hearing rave things about it. I've even heard people say like it should just become part of the permanent collection of the museum. So talk to me about how did this come about? Because I know Dr. Blight has a whole book on Yale slavery history. Y'all did the film on the Black HBCU that could have been. And so this sounds like this is just an attachment or more to that story.
Yeah, let me sort of lay the context. And in some ways, this is an exhibition and a story that's been 300 years in the making. And it draws on long reservoirs of community memory and formal archives. On February 16th, there was the launch of a book by David Blight and the Yale and Slavery Research Project. My great colleague Hope McGrath and I are both authors and editors with David of that book, and it represents great collective work. Nothing is ever done by a single author, artist, or creator. And along with the book, Yale and Slavery, A History, there is an audio walking tour, a website, video, and importantly, this exhibition at the New Haven Museum, intentionally at the New Haven Museum, at a community space, not just a campus space. And importantly, the university is making sure that the museum is free and open to all during the run of this exhibition. I was asked back in June to do an exhibition, and I'm smart enough to know that that is a time to call on great friends and allies. And Chaz and I would both want to uplift and center David John Walker, fabulous member of our community who just got his second degree in graphic design, this time from the Yale School of Art in 2023. And David's down in Tennessee celebrating his grandmother's 100th birthday.
Wow.
So he's with us in spirit, but the great designer. So I tapped David and reached out to Chaz, who's a great colleague and collaborator and comrade in so many ways and has been integral to the work. And so we've been at this with a great team, and I'd want to center also in particular Jennifer Coggins, Hope McGrath, and Tobias Cropper among the great cloud of witnesses. And it really is a great opportunity. And I think Chaz and David and I have found that 1 + 1 + 1 equals not 3, but infinity. So look forward to you coming to see it and everybody else. We have been getting rave reviews, and I might share some of those, but this has really been exciting work. And I don't know about you, Chaz, it's the first time I've formally done curatorial work in this way. You and I have been around these kinds of things, but it's been interesting to dive in the pool.
Yes. No, I agree, Mike. This was my first official foray into curating an official installed exhibit. And I think we did a wonderful job, but it certainly speaks to the necessity and the richness of collaboration and the group that you call the Great Cloud of Witnesses.
So did you have to wrestle with what to put into this exhibit? Was there a wealth of information and pictures? Like, how did you sort of decide? Was the decision based on how much information something had or how little something had? How did you make the decision to choose what you chose?
I mean, a couple thoughts on that. again, this has been 3 centuries in the making in some ways. The actual work of the Yale and Slavery Research Project has been going on since 2020. I went back the other day and looked at the outline that I did for our narrative in early 2021. And there's sort of, some tent poles in the story, as it were. And so I think we weren't coming at this with a completely blank piece of paper, nor were we looking to take 400 pages of a book and put it on a wall, because that wouldn't engage anybody. So there are certain key stories, the economic realities and foundations of this crime against humanity that we know as chattel slavery. And in particular in New Haven, the story of the construction of Connecticut Hall, which is one place we have documented evidence that enslaved Black men worked on a construction of a building in town and on campus. The story of the 1831 college is one that is really central to New Haven and to this story. And so that's another tentpole. And then the various attempts at memory and mismemory, the Yale Civil War Memorial. So I think we had a couple of things, but one of the key things that you'll see when you go to the show, we are blessed to be using a rotunda space. So it's round and like a clock face. And this is a history exhibit, so it's chronological. But literally at noon and midnight, as it were, is Black resistance and community building. And I think the most important move in this work and of this exhibition is to put at the center those who have always been central to it. And so throughout the exhibition, throughout the materials, we are really looking to center the stories of Black New Haven from the beginning throughout. So that, I think, also guided us in this. We use replicas of archival materials, and we're blessed with that. And I think we'll get into some discussion of this great room that we've built, a library, as it were, of the 1831 college. But I think that is, part of the way, and it was a great process. In some ways, we had less time, I think, Chaz, David, and me, than typically. But I don't know about you, Chaz. In some ways, that may have been more productive because we had no time to waste. So you like to use the 1 minute quote, and that's definitely been true in this work.
Mm-hmm. This sort of like, if you swing, you better not miss. And I say that we did a wonderful job, certainly in that 1831 room that you just mentioned. And that space, Babz, that's the space where we literally are lifting up the names, faces, and lives of many early Black Yale students and graduates. And I mean, for people who've actually been in the space, they've had everything from sort of like sighs of amazement. Some people have jumped up and down. I know people who have gone back several times since the opening just to sit and commune in the space. And so I always felt like in this Yale and slavery story, certainly facts, figures, and ledgers would be important because, this whole operation was built on documents and facts. But I also felt that central to the story of Yale and slavery, or anything in American chattel slavery, the stories of Black people who were impacted, affected, a part of the story should be lifted up. And I had the opportunity, well, really since last summer, to be in a research fellowship with the community engagement team at the Meineke. And much of that work was centered around researching the lives of early Black Yale students. And then out of that work, collaboratively with Jennifer Coggins, primarily, and with Michael, and then with Hope McGrath, we started compiling a database of early Black Yale students and graduates. And of course, Michael and his great planning knew that that information had to make its way to the overall exhibit. And thus we have the 1831 room.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I'd add, Babz, and you'll see this, we've mentioned a bunch of names, our names and our collaborators, but the names that matter here are the names of the enslaved and free Black people who built New Haven, who built Yale, who built Connecticut, built America. And so we're very much in our contemporary way thinking of, say, their names. And we have, some of the names are not known, and we recognize that by noting unnamed. Some are only first names at this point. More work needs to be done to recover the full names and stories of enslaved people here, as is the case throughout the country. And then other names we do know and uplift. And there literally are in this show more than 500 names of Black New Haveners enslaved and free. And those are really the names that matter. And by saying that there are 500, you can get, we're not going to be able to name them now, but encourage people to know. And it's going to be many more names than I think anybody knew, because not to like shout out Chaz and me and our colleagues too much, but we know a bit about this stuff. And we were blown away by how much more, and in many ways, this goes even beyond the book, and it proves the power of collaboration and of generative scholarship, because we've got 500 names and stories in this show, and there's more than that. That's by no means comprehensive. And we intentionally close the show with a quote from the great Elizabeth Alexander, who is at once a New Havener and a national and international treasure, where she says that history is ongoing, and notes that history is not about the period, it's about the ellipses, the dot. And we, in this show, have a lot. It's not a huge space, but there's a lot in it. And people have been finding that an hour, you know, they can spend an hour or more. On the opening weekend, we had people who were there for 3 or 4 hours. And so there's a lot to be learned, but we also hope it will spur people to go and learn more on their own. And there's a great quote on the floor when you enter that comes from David John Walker, our brilliant graphic designer, who said, and it says, and you'll see it when you go, you are standing here as a participant in the future. And we really want people with this exhibition not to be mere visitors, but participants in knowing and making and sharing history.
So as you're doing this work and discovering, you know, just the tip of the iceberg of the legacy of the history of slavery in New Haven, what was the most stunning thing? Like, what was the thing that just made you feel like, wow, I had no idea? Did you have moments like that?
I guess maybe not no idea, but I would say certainly a theme that is kind of running throughout the whole thing is just the pervasive nature of slavery in Connecticut. I think people tend to believe that the Northeast, the North, Connecticut was like, you know, a ground for safety, and that's not the case.
And it wasn't a ground for safety.
Yeah, we have a quote from William Lloyd Garrison, the white abolitionist, who in a letter in 1835 described our beloved state, Connecticut, as the Georgia of New England. Ooh. And what we've heard, what we've seen ourselves being there, and again, Chaz knows this story as well as anybody in town. I know it pretty well. So this may not have been a surprise to us, but the depth and breadth has impressed us. And it is a surprise to many people, particularly if they come from the dominant culture, to understand that, yes, in Connecticut. And one of the things working with our colleagues in the New Haven Museum, we identify some people who are elsewhere in the museum story, Ralph Isaacs Ingersoll, who are noted in other museum exhibitions in different ways. There's actually a room from their house, but the full story of their relationship as white supremacists, and in the case of one of them as an enslaver, hasn't been told before. So we actually have that sort of, you know, yes, that guy too, you know, has been part of this. And one of the most powerful, I think, objects in the show is an oak board felled by a great Black lumberjack out of New York City, on which we have affixed reproductions of advertisements for the sale of human property and the recapture of freedom seekers, all from New Haven newspapers. And there's more than 40. And these are just a few of those that you would find in the newspapers. And I knew we were onto something when a colleague of mine here at Beinecke, who's also white and is a lifelong Connecticut resident, who was scanning these, came to me and said, I had no idea. And she was impressed by each of these stories and by the fact that they were about human beings, and then impressed by the scope of so many, all in New Haven.
Mm. So what do you do with the information when you find out that founding fathers or founding Connecticut folks who had respectability and all this other kind of stuff were enslavers of people? Like, is that, I mean, does that change the story of who they are? Does that change how we should view them? I mean, what do we do with this information once we know it?
I think that honestly, we should use it as a way to really view society and current systems. If these people were leaders helping to form the new nation, right? And then leaders in the new nation, masters of politics, policy, education, public thought, it should inform us, about the ways in which that their experiences and their thinking trickles down and affects us today. And I think that's where we can really do some now work as a wider society. Certainly, it's hard to hold individuals who are alive 200 years ago responsible in any sort of real way. But what we should do is be able to give ourselves as a society a new look.
I think it's a great question, Babz, and to build a bit on what Chaz has said, thinking about the exhibition, thinking from the perspective of a library, and I don't want to say we don't have responsibility by what I'm about to say, but our job, first and foremost, is to give you and everyone the ingredients for you to cook the meal, right? So we're not necessarily the ones to say, this is what should be done going forward, but to provide the information and to encourage people to make sense make sense of the past in the present for the future. We have the quote from the Reverend Dr. Alexander Crummell, who studied at Yale, even though he legally wasn't allowed to be there, and persisted and was such a great leader in the liberation movement, where it says, we read the future by the past. So we're all about what you're talking about. What do you do with this information? But I think we're really keen that we're not the ones to tell folks what to do, but rather, here's the full story. You are, again, participants in the future. So we will have failed if nothing happens. But I don't know that, coming from the library perspective, I'm supposed to be the author of what the community should do with this. Our responsibility here is to provide the information and to encourage people and hold people accountable to do something with it, not to tell them what to do with it, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So do you think this, I mean, we are in such tumultuous times in terms of grappling with race and slavery and how to tell
and truth.
And truth, like how to tell the truth about slavery and the building of this country. Is this a good time to add this to the larger, wider conversation?
I'd say so. We're at a point in our nation's history where we're really trying to figure out what we're going to become, who we are and who we will be moving forward. So if we're at this point in general, this is certainly an issue that's central to figuring out our national identity. And a part of that national identity now, I'm speaking as Chaz, the citizen, is a part of looking at yourself is kind of assessing both your good points and the things you need to work on and the things you may need to atone for and repairs you need to make. And so will there be resistance to this kind of information coming out? Sure, we see that already, but it doesn't sort of take the onus off of people who know to tell stories and share information.
It's never too late to do right. I mean, better to do it earlier. And it's important institutionally and as a community to recognize this is not the first time this story has been told. In 2001, 3 graduate students affiliated with TA Solidarity and GISO, what's now Unite Here, led an effort joined by the Amistad Committee, which published a report that called Yale to account for not doing a full history at its 300th birthday. And this is a story that's not just a Yale story. So it's when you call Yale to account, it's also the community, because they're so intertwined, particularly in the 1700s and 1800s.
Mhm.
So that town meeting against the college was not a Yale thing or a New Haven thing. It was an everybody thing. So this has happened before, and institutionally and as leadership, the challenge was not taken up in 2001. Would that it would have been. Can't go back and rewrite that history. And frankly, the longer you wait, the more painful the reckoning. So would that would have happened, but it's never the wrong time to do the right history. And so in some ways, you have to think about it in this context. And we have obligations institutionally. If we want our students and our society to do real history, we got to start it at home. And so if we have graduates who are setting policy in other states, who are doing things to ban books and to promote the eradication of history, we have the responsibility to stand up as an institution. And so it's hitting in 2024 in its own way, but anytime there's going to be something going on. So, and again, it's one of the things that encourage people to take up the work and make it their own.
Mm. So tell me something about the students that you found that went to Yale in those very early days. Where did they live? Who were they? Where did they come from? Do we know lots about them? And are there descendants of folks still around?
Sure. I would say I'll start with one person who's a home person. So you asked, where did the students come from? In the case of the first Black person, self-acknowledged Black person, to earn a degree from Yale was a gentleman by the name of Cortlandt Van Rensselaer Creed, who earned his degree from the School of Medicine in 1857. And he was born and raised in New Haven. His parents were people who were very active in the community, certainly in the Black community, but even in the wider community, in both education and in entrepreneurial ventures. And Dr. Creed was a product of New Haven. And so you have folks right from this community. And then in some cases, you have people who were from the South and studied at schools, historically Black colleges and universities, and then made their way from there to Yale for study.
We are sort of informally calling this, Babz, the Constellation Project, because oftentimes, and this is true in any setting, you focus on the first and the one bright star, but the reality is there's lots of stars, and you get more illumination from the constellation than you do from a single star. So your question really gets at some of the things that we're beginning to think about and hope that more people think about and put together, which what are the networks? There's networks of kin, both blood kin and spiritual kin. There's networks of disciplines. There's church networks. There's geographic networks. A lot of these folks who came from outside of New Haven, most of the early students were either New Haveners who went to Yale or HBCU grads who came here, and they may have known folks through the American Missionary Association and other kind of congregational church ties. So there's always networks. Nobody gets anywhere by themselves or without knowing something. A bunch of them, to your point, who were not New Haveners from birth, roomed together on Dixwell, on Gough Street, on Howe Street. So there's all kinds of stuff. And they may have rented from Black property owners in New Haven. So there's a lot to be known. Many of them went to churches in town. Some of them ended up staying and becoming pastors of churches in town. There's a Yale grad who was the early pastor at Emmanuel, a number at Dixwell. So there's all kinds of these things. And on the descendants, there are Creed descendants who gathered when Curtis Patton and others led, and a couple of them, by the way, Chaz, were through the exhibition. There was a great grandson who left a note.
Oh, wow, it's great.
And Denise Keys Page has been really important in the work from February 16th and ongoing. She is a descendant. Brian Anderson, who many people on this radio station know, is a descendant of the Park and Bassett families, important memory keeper, and part of this story, and very much the reading the future by the past. And then I wanted to uplift behind me James Hathaway Robinson Sr., who did his first degree in sociology, and then 20 years later in the 30s got his PhD from Yale, who did for Cincinnati and Memphis what Du Bois did for Philadelphia and his Philadelphia Negro. But I had this image here when we were doing a Zoom, and a couple days after the Zoom back last month, had a note from Forrester Lee, Woody Lee, who many people know, one of the great centurions of history and memory in our community and beyond, who said, Mike, that was a nice talk you guys were doing, but I was really fixated on the guy over your shoulder. That's my grandfather. And we're seeing that my friend Adrian Hopkins was through and was like, Mike, why do you have my great-great-uncle's image, Edward Archer Randolph? And so one of the great things about doing this visually, doing it in real time and space, is the kinds of questions you asked, people ask, and importantly, people bring information. This is embodied knowledge. And again, what I said earlier, it's not just the formal archives of books and artifacts in a library, in a museum, but it's also the knowledge people literally carry in themselves, and the community memory embodied in people and churches. And having a real exhibition in real time and space where humans gather together, I think we're just going to keep finding, and this constellation is going to grow and become brighter and brighter and brighter.
And that's the goal, honestly. I would say, for me in particular, the story of descendants was personally very important, because these people, these descendants, are people who keep sort of the flame of the history of Black America alive. And there's a group that I'd like to acknowledge of descendants that's sort of been organized since 2021. And they did a Zoom program for Gilder Lehrman called Gleaming in the Shadows of Slavery. And that group has pretty much stayed, in contact with each other, and they talk, and they've become like a little union, which is really important. But in this group, you have such a wide swath of Black American history. You have people like the Ish family, that was well known in Black medical and Black business circles, and then you have the Baker family that descends from a gentleman who was enslaved starting out in Virginia, and then made his way eventually to Yale, earning the PhD in philosophy in 1903. And he was the first Black person on record, period, to earn the PhD in philosophy. So there's so much information and history in sort of this story of early Black Yale students and descendants, and there's so much more to learn.
And I think to build on that, this is, again, not work that is done with a book being published or an exhibition being mounted. These are hopefully catalysts for more work, fuel for the ongoing journey. I think about this a lot. Also, it reminds us this is not that long ago. My husband's great-grandfather, Sergeant Alfred Powers, was one of the Black patriots who fought in the Connecticut 29. That's not that long ago. And having Denise and her embodied knowledge, and Brian, the folks that Chaz noted who've been on online programs, remind us that this is very recent history, and it's living history, and it's ongoing, and that's this crime against humanity is not something that happened way back then, and it's just a matter of thinking about it as a historic thing. There are living legacies of resilience and living legacies as a community we need to deal with. One of the most powerful descendants stories, I think, that really fueled Chaz and me and others is Regina Mason, who's the great-great-great-granddaughter of William Grimes.
Oh, William Grimes, yes.
Fugitive slave narrative. And when I first told her the story of the 1831 college, it was on a group Zoom that Chaz had pulled together for community members generally, and Gina, while she lives in Oakland, is effectively a New Havener, so she was there as a local, and she stopped and began to weep because she realized if that college had been built, her ancestors, Grimes's sons, would have gone there. And what would that have meant for her and the intergenerational story that she represents as a family, but then also brought her out as a nation as a whole. And I think that's one of the things we also hope with this constellation, that people will look at. There's 224 Black students and graduates that we've identified, from James W.C. Pennington in the 1830s to Shirley Graham in 1940. And that's probably 3 times as many as anybody's ever had in one place. So it's remarkable. We also hope, in addition to celebrating that, people will think, if there were 224 who persisted and made a way out of no way, what if that college had been built? Might there have been 2,240? So that we have, on the one hand, need to celebrate and recognize, but that's not the end point. That should also be a reminder that the work is unfinished and that the repair that needs to be done is very real. And people like James Hathaway Robinson Sr. and Thomas Nelson Baker and Shirley Graham and Otelia Cromwell, all of them hopefully will be looking over our shoulders, literally saying, what are you going to do now?
So what are you going to do now? I mean, does this live on? How do you keep this, do you keep this in the forefront of our consciousness? And do either of you disconnect from it at some point? Like, do you pass it on? Do you step away from it? Do you just keep pushing for more information? Like, what do you do now?
Well, I'll tell you, it's going to live on in the sense that the Beinecke is going to be there. And so there will always be avenues to do research, but I personally will be taking it on because it's a part of who I am. This is a story of my life. It's the story of the community. Yes, the Black community, but directly the community of people that I come from, people who are descended from American chattel slavery, but were educated at historically Black colleges and universities, and then went on to predominantly white institutions, Ivy League universities, but also these are the people who literally helped to establish Black community, Black society. Certainly, we must remember that America was not integrated, and in some cases still is not. So everything that New Haven would need in general, the Black community would need. Everything that was needed in Dallas, Texas, in general, was needed for the Black community in Dallas. And these people that we're talking about are people who literally built their communities: insurance companies, banks, law offices, schools, medical practices, hospitals. Everything you can think of was necessary. And these were the people who helped to build those things. And that's certainly a part of my personal being and family history. And so I won't stop because it's who I am.
The book is available free online as a PDF. The exhibition is free. So we're trying to make these things as accessible as possible. I have the documentary that you noted that Tobias Cropper directed. And, Tobias, I sort of, in terms of thinking about legacy, everybody who works on my team's younger than me. So it'll go on whether I win the lottery and take off or something else happens, or I retire in the normal course in the years ahead. And so I think all of us are conscious of that. Chaz, as chair of the Freedom Trail, is conscious of having these sites all around the state, and so that they will live on and inspire. We're working in conscious ways to take the Constellation project of the early Black students and graduates and render it in an online format. More to come, not a date certain, not exactly clear, but we got people working so that it'll become accessible and people can add to it. There are folks talking to school librarians, will be coming through the exhibition in a month or so. There's some work with Career High School and other high schools for how to use archives in teaching. So there's some good generative work, some of which is going on in its own way. And so this is content knowledge, and sometimes this is going to be a way to fuel some things. I think our colleagues at the New Haven Museum will be thinking about what they can do. They are reopening their Amistad gallery shortly, and so really excited about that. And that'll be another one of sort of 1 + 1 = many. And, you know, I'm always cheered by when you ask, and you do such a great job, Babz, of centering history in the programs
Exactly.
you do. So I'm hopeful it'll live on because you're doing what you do.
Thank you very
Exactly,
much.
Babz. You with your programming, and then also, you know, Mike referenced the ways in which like institutions here are gonna have this work continue, but certainly, you know, our Black churches and organizations that work with youth, like Jack and Jill, the Afro-American Historical Society, the Amistad Committee, Discovering Amistad. There's so many organizations who have done this work because it's a part of who they are, who consciously or not have been continuing this story. And so if we all just continue on the road that we've been on for so long, these stories will you know continue to proliferate in the community.
And the work, you know, is probably never finished, but that doesn't mean we're ever free to desist from it. I always like to quote the Hebrew Bible, the Christian New Testament, and the scriptures of Bob Marley. The work is about recognizing that the stone that the builder rejected has become the chief cornerstone. And that, I think, is really big part of this work. Again, to put at the center of the storytelling those who are always central. And I'll know, you know, that the work that I, you know, can ease up a little bit if and when I know that these are never just stories that were part of it, but that they really are at the center of our institution at Yale, of our community of New Haven.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for being guests today. I so appreciate the time that you take. I'm so looking forward to seeing this exhibit. As soon as they open the doors again, I will be there to see it. Thank you so much. It's being so well received, and people are buzzing about it all around town. And I always think that's a good thing when I hear people talking about it's not a concert, it's a history on display, and people are buzzing about it. That's a good thing. So thank you, Mike Morand from the Binder Key, and thank you, Charles Warner from the public school system.
Thank you,
I appreciate
Babz.
it. And come
Yeah,
back when
thank
you're
you,
ready to talk
Babz.
about constellation. Because now it's in my head. Now it's in my head. So
Yes.
come back when you're ready to talk about that too. Thank y'all.
Okay, thank you.
All
Thanks
right.
for having us.
So make your way to the New Haven Museum and see this wonderful exhibit. It's going to be there from now until the summer. So you've got a whole lot of time to see this thing, and it's free. So go to the newhavenmuseum.org website. It's right there. You could click on it and they'll tell you when you could come and when it's open and some background information. So to all those who are listening this morning, make your way over there and say hi to those folks for me. I'll see y'all. Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Harry.